Hello everyone, we are Group F and we're going to present a utility assessment of a laboratory report. First, we're going to explain what is a laboratory report and we're going further to elaborate on how to use a lab report and why it is essential. Lastly, we're going to break down all the assessment utility aspects for examining the usefulness, effectiveness, and efficiency of a laboratory report. According to the Science Lab report of Monash University and Duke University, a laboratory report is a formal, structured record of communicating the results of practical work or experiments. In addition, the Duke University provides a framework of a lab report consisting of an abstract, introduction, procedures, a result, discussion, and appendices. Generally, in the classroom or a lab, a simpler used structure of a lab report is similar to what is given by monash.edu.com as you may see on the slide. Compared to the previous one, this structure is without abstract and appendices. In other words, it will be easier for the students. It is vital to know the difficulty level of a lab report to adjust to students' grade level. The next question is, why do we need to use a lab report? Hellman 2012 highlighted the usefulness of this report, which is improving students' critical and analytical thinking skills and also writing skills. In this case, written communication skills. How could it be possible? Because doing a laboratory report involves experientialism, cognitivism, and social constructivism learning. Turning to the assessment utility factors, there are six aspects that we're going to unpack, which are reliability, validity, bandwidth, bias, fidelity, and measurement. We also provide a biology report as a concrete example, so we may have a better insight into this. First, the reliability, simply knowing as consistency. Consistency of what? Consistency of the results obtained from an assessment. I'm pretty sure we all agree with that. However, DART 2005 brings about a more complex definition of consistency, which includes consistency across time, across tasks, and across markers. So, across time means the result will be the same or similar, even if conducted on a different time or occasion. Across task means that if this assessment is replaced by another type of assessment, let's say if this laboratory report will be replaced by a journal and measure the same level of knowledge or learning objectives, it will give similar results. Meanwhile, across markers refers to the use of rubrics, so it might reduce the level of subjectivity. For example, as you may see on the screen, we have the practical assessment table. Let's have a look at one of those points, the discussion part. There are some indicators for which measuring the level of student accomplishment, or I would say teachers' expectation of their students. While on the next slide, you can see the rubric and example of the rubric marking. If a teacher gives a score of B minus, as in this example, then if the test is consistent across the markers, it will give the same results when checked by other teachers. Again, using a rubric may increase the level of reliability and also validity, the next point that I want to unfold to you. Validity. It can be understood as the level to which an assessment tool measures what it claims to measure. It includes content, constructs, criterion, and consequential, or 4Cs. The simplest way to assess a validity by against your design lab report with these questions. You may ask, do the tasks match the learning intention we are interested in? Does the test cover a wide enough range of content? Are there enough items or tasks to cover the scope of what is being assessed? Do the tasks require use of the desired skills and reasoning process? Is there an emphasis on deep rather than surface knowledge? Are the directions for the assessment task clear? Are the questions ambiguous? Are the time limit is sufficient? So that's all the things that you need to assess whether your lab report is valid enough or not. So the next person will talk more about the bandwidth and bias, and still it's a part of assessment utility of a lab report. Thank you.
Alright, so when it comes to bandwidth, the assessment will entail a considerable amount of information or content that will be categorized into four main aspects. And these are the factual, analytical, subjective, and objective information. If we have a look at this slide, it shows an example of experimental design as well as unobserved raw data. What we can see in those columns are statistical observation that primarily deals with facts. Such approach is correlated to various learning theories, including the experiential and the cognitive aspects. Now, cognitive abilities are very correlated to analytical information as it is the interpretation of factual information. In other words, students need to comprehend and learn how to summarize and interpret raw data. The example shown in this slide is the discussion section of the report where it requires students to utilize their knowledge of enzymes to explain the results. Now, what this does is it promotes critical thinking as well as allows students to synthesize and reflect upon the knowledge they learned during their lessons. It also enables social constructivism where the interpretation of results could also be done as a group discussion. All right, so moving on to subjective information. These are the information from only one point of view, which could be presented as opinions, such as the ones you see in the websites and the like. In our assessment here, subjective information is represented by the question shown in this figure, where it asks students to reflect on the level of collaboration they had when planning and undertaking the practical. The last aspect of information that will be included in this assessment is objective information, where the learner is subjected to various points of view, as you can see within the same question. These questions are essential for students to reflect on their collaborative efforts between their group members and themselves. All right, so moving on to bias. One of the biases that could arise in this context is the language barrier, where the learner could misinterpret the information shown within the assessment, or may not even grasp the full meaning of the question. This may elevate stress due to information overload, causing students to feel disconnected from the holistic picture of this assessment. Another bias that may exist is cognitive bias, which is defined as a systematic error in a person's subjective way of thinking. One aspect of cognitive bias is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which refers to how people perceive a concept or an event to be simplistic just because their knowledge about it may be simple or lacking. One of the most controversial statements made by David Dunning and Justin Kruger is that the less you know about something, the less complicated it may appear. Hence, not everyone may be equal with their apprehension of the materials presented in this assessment, either because of language barrier or a decreased level of understanding that is already existed. One solution to this is determining students' level and providing them with formative tasks throughout the semester to increase their understanding of the discussed material. So when they are solving summative assessment like the report we have, they wouldn't have an issue with it, and the assessment would now really assess their effort and try and assess their understanding. This, however, would only work in a small-scale classroom. And now I'm going to pass it off to Sebastian, who will talk about fidelity and measurement.
In the case of fidelity for laboratory reports, first we're gonna have a look of some definitions. The first one who says the adherence of actual treatment delivery to the protocol originally developed. The second one who says to assess conformity with prescribed elements and the absence of non-prescribed elements. And the last one who says to determine how adequately a program model has been implemented. So now we progress to the question to how fidelity in laboratory reports is related. So we can say that fidelity in laboratory reports make reference to how adequately the structure has been implemented in order to respond to the original outcomes. We can also say that fidelity responds to the need to account for negative or ambiguous findings. In other words, it can reflect a failure or success of the model as intended. The last element we will analyze is called measurement. How can we define measurement? Measurement is the process of assigning numbers to individuals of their characteristics. We also have into account specific rules to that process. The second definition we have is a process of quantifying the degree to which someone or something possesses a given trait. Example, quality, characteristics, or features. To conclude, we can say two things. The first, it's in accordance with the presented information, we can say that the provided example entails all the aspects we discuss and reflect today. And second, we can say that a student's development can be greatly increased as long as such elements that we analyze today can be applied and reflected within the instrument of evaluation.